Welcome to another episode of Things You Didn't Know About the Holocaust. I'm Phyllis Simbler Miller, and I'm here today with Don Gaber. Now, he's the author of this book. Can you see it? Vienna on Fire, a World War II story of survival. And it's a story of his mother. Although, I want to make this up front, it is a novel, and there's a whole sequence uh, in Germany at Goring's hunting lodge that did not happen. So, but we're going to stick to the actual facts here. So, Don, start with your mother's, life up until that moment and the ice skating rink in front of the city hall in Vienna.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me to be on your podcast, Phyllis. And uh, I'm happy to share with you what I can about my mother's story, much of which would come out in little bits and pieces. She wasn't overly forthcoming about a lot of information that, as time got closer to the Nazi occupation and what happened after that. But what I will tell you is she was born in 1920. She was a single child. She lived with her mother and father, who were part of and her grandmother on her mother's side, in a very nice apartment in Vienna. And they owned a store, a very well furnished store with perfumes and barber supplies. And they serviced all kinds of clients throughout Austria and Vienna. And her life up to that horrible day on March 12th, 1938, was one that sounded pretty enjoyable. Now, her parents, what I found out later, and I didn't not know this right away, and that's part of the story, is her parents were secular Jews, but according to my mother, I never knew that. She told me that she went to a Catholic school. They celebrated Christmas. Not a word of Jewish culture that I can remember from a child or as an adult. So her life was skiing, and she had just graduated from high school in March or just earlier than that, in 1938. And she was an outdoors person. She was very political minded, though. And at that time, in Europe in the early 30s and throughout the middle 30s, she was crawling out the window and, much to her parents' chagrin, and taking food to people who were either in hiding or trying to avoid arrest.
No,
And
wait. No, I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves.
okay.
Unless, are we talking about hiding because they were political opponents of the Austrians?
There were a lot. What was happening in Austria at that time uh, is that there was a communist party, the communists, the socialists, and I guess the conservatives, and there was a lot of struggle between them, and the Austrian government was not real happy with, I guess, the communist, people there. And my mother was taking food to people for whatever reason, and I don't even know why she was, why they were hiding. But this was her nature. And in the book, and you point out that, yeah, it is a novel, but everything that I found out that happened, not just to my mother, but to other people at that time, other Austrian women and men, and German as well, that almost all the events in the book happened to someone. And so I combined the fiction and the nonfiction into a story, a narrative, because my goal in writing this, I know I may be not quite finished answering your question, was to tell people what was happening there, not just to one person. I didn't want to make her into a hero or anything like that, but what was happening in general. So to get back to your question, life was good. She went to
And were her parents Austrian born, or had they come from?
her father was Hungarian, and her mother
Oh, but
was
wait, let's remind people before World War One, Hungary was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Okay, keep
right,
going.
right. So you know how that happened in Europe, and so that they came from those two sides.
Wait, and where did her mother come from?
My mother was born in Vienna.
No, no, your grandmother. I mean, your mother's mother.
My mother's mother was Czech.
Okay. So that
So
was also part of the Austro-Hungarian
yeah,
Empire.
with a lot of German. There was
Right,
the Czech German side. The borders were, how it is,
right.
was so, but the big moral of the big point of my conversation at this point was that her life was good. She went to the opera, she went ice skating, she went skiing. She had just graduated from high school. She was planning to go to the University of Vienna. She wanted to, according to her story that she always told me, she wanted to study nursing. So that's, and her parents, they also had a very good life. They had a cook, they had a chauffeur, they had a maid, they played bridge every night, but they ran the business. And her mother was the real business person, and her father was the sales guy who loved to schmooze and, you know, have coffee and, he brought in the business, but I'm supposed to be more like him.
Okay, so what happened? It's March 12th, 1938, and your mother is ice skating on the public outdoor rink.
Yes. Now, this is where the book begins. And the photo on the front of the book shows my mother ice skating with a fellow on an ice rink in front of this Vienna Town Hall. And that photo was one of several photos that we found in a closet, stuffed away. But I did get to ask my mother some questions about some of these photos. She passed away in 2017. But once again, she was very reluctant about revealing anything outside her public consumption stories. But what happened on that day was, or about that day in the photo, but what happened on March 12th in 1938 is the Anschluss. And the Anschluss was Hitler's uh, annexation of Austria into the German uh,
Right.
territory. And at that point, all Austria ceased to exist. It became part of Germany. And along with that, the laws that had been passed in Germany in 1935, which were the Nuremberg laws, the anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish laws, applied immediately to the Jews in Vienna and in Austria. Most of the Jews in Austria lived in Vienna. And so this was the earthquake that took place, not just for my mother, it took place for everybody. But I want to point out something that I think is what I learned. And this is kind of getting back to what you don't know about the Holocaust, which for me was a lot. I mean, I learned this and that like other people here. I mean, I grew up
You
in,
did know your mother at an early age. Your mother was a survivor. Is that correct?
well, yes and no. I mean, I knew she was a survivor. She came here when she was 18 and a half years old. When I asked her what happened to her parents, she said, well, there was a lot of bombing in Austria, and I guess they were killed. That is the story. So what that implied was that who was ever dropping the bombs in Austria, which, there was no year or date or anything connected to it. It had nothing to do with, being deported or kicked out or any of that. And I didn't learn about that until writing this book and what really happened. And that's part of the story. But no, I mean, I knew she survived because, here I am. I knew she was raised in Vienna, but I did not know that she was a Holocaust survivor. And I had no idea what did happen to her parents. She never said, my wife edited the book and was part of the researcher with myself, of course, that we found out what did happen to them. Uh, and of course, they were victims of the Holocaust. And there's a big question mark about that part of the story. But this was the big revelation. Two things. One is I did not know that I had Jewish heritage.
Oh, you didn't know you were Jewish at
No,
all?
nope, nope, not a word, not a word. And
Wait,
two,
wait. Was your father Jewish? And he,
my father was Jewish. He never said anything about it too. We didn't find out that he was Jewish until we found a bar mitzvah card invitation. I was raised in the Unitarian household.
and wait, was he a survivor also?
No, no, he came here with his parents in 1924. His father was and mother were opera singers, and his father was an opera singer with the Metropolitan Opera, and they immigrated in 1924. He was 8 years old. He was born
From
from
Germany?
Germany. He was born in Darmstadt, Germany. So
Okay.
not, and so I
You
always
find
used
out
to
you're
make
Jew.
this,
Okay.
yeah, I always used to make this joke. I said, my mother, she should be Jewish. And it
Did you
was I was
really?
making a joke, but I didn't know until we started uncovering and evidence with documents, and I can get into that if you're interested. But yes, that's the short story of my Jewish heritage.
And what was the second thing that you were most surprised about?
Well, I found out what happened to her parents, literally. I mean, right down to the German documentation. And of course, everybody who has done any study in this topic knows how how diligent the Germans were, with documenting. And what we found was that they were in a group of a couple thousand, one of the last deportations in Vienna in 1941, in November
Okay,
of the.
now wait a second. I want to know this.
Okay,
Were they moved from their nice apartment somewhere else before they were deported?
yes, they were, and we found that out too, and we found out where that was, and
So it was
yes,
like a Jewish home or something where,
it was a building where as much as we found out, there's so much we didn't find out. But what we did find out is there were a lot of people that were kind of transferred from where they lived to this other residence in Vienna
right?
before
And do you
they.
know what year? Did you
Oh
research?
yeah, yeah. No, I know the year, I know the month, I know the day that they
Okay,
were.
so what? So tell us.
Well, I did. It was November 21st, 1939. They were deported, and to Kaunas, they were taken off of a
Wait,
train.
no, wait, no, wait. I'm confusing you.
Okay.
When were they moved from their nice apartment to the building in Vienna?
Um, Now that I have to look. I'm not really sure when exactly that happened. I could probably
It's
find
okay.
out, but
So now on November 9th, right? Is
20,
that
November 21st,
November 21st?
1939.
Okay.
The documentation that I do have is when they were deported, when they were in a part of one of the last large transports, deportations from Vienna, which consisted of several thousand. They were the part of the last ones, and they were transported. They were on their way to, I believe, Riga or Kanos, and they were taken off of a train, and they were executed along with a bunch of other people
Just
at
on the way.
on the way. And I'm not sure exactly, the exact, location where that happened. Probably could find that out too. But what I never found, and I haven't found out, and I'm still just trying to figure out, and I have theories about a lot of different things, is how they survived from the Anschluss, 1938. My mother left a little more than a year after that. She got to the United States, and I can go into that, how
Yeah.
that happened. But her parents survived another 2 years. And the question is, how? Because they had been stripped of their business, they'd been stripped of their belongings, they'd been stripped of uh, any financial sources that they had. But my grandfather, her father, although he was, like, I like to go out and have a party time, he was smart in how he hid things. He was arrested. I have a picture of his mugshot from the Gestapo. It's frightening. I look at this, I think, and what's really frightening is I look like him.
Wait, so when was he arrested?
He was arrested around 1940, somewhere 1940, 41. No, it must have been right around 40. And I'm not even sure what I think he was arrested for was having not paid. It was all about money. Everything was about money. And we can go into some of that business too if you're interested. But one of the things that was sort of interesting about that, if you look at people who were arrested by the Gestapo, photos, mugshot photos, many of them had been beaten. He wasn't. So, so my theory is that he had money stashed, or he had sources that he could draw on. He had friends that he was, you know, paying to help them survive, even though the business was gone, the apartment was gone. Grandmother was in the hospital and out of the hospital. There was a warehouse with things, artwork and things.
No, wait, so was that part true or not?
That part was true.
So they hid things in the warehouse,
They hid things in the warehouse. Yeah,
but then, okay, so he was forced to sell his business to his employee.
that's correct.
And did the employee tell the Gestapo about the stuff in the warehouse?
Don't know. Don't know. His employee, we don't really know too much about his employee, except that my mother didn't like him. See, my mother was primarily raised by her grandmother. While her parents were working at night, they played bridge. They were, that's what they did. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, but she would go as she got a little bit older, she would go and work in the store, in the shop, and the employee was there, and she didn't like him because she didn't like his attitude towards my parents, or her parents rather, I'm sorry. And she thought that he was kind of using my grandfather's good nature, against him. So I extrapolated on that theme, and I extrapolated on other themes that I don't have in complete proof, but that's why it's a novel and not a nonfiction book.
So how did your mother get out?
There's another unknown question. I asked her that, right? I asked her many questions, and the common answer was, well, it was a long time ago, and I don't really remember, or something along those lines. How she got out, the what I do know, okay, there was a relative of her grandmother's in New York who uh, signed, whatever documents she
Right.
needed
The
to
support affidavit.
immigrate, and that's true. And there was also another relative who signed, or put up some kind of amount of money that said that she would be self-sufficient. That's true. But she had to wait for almost a year. So the Anschluss took place in March, and she immigrated in May of
Of
39.
39.
So there was a whole year, and I asked her about how did you get out? And there was this time period, and I asked her many questions about it, and most of it she would not answer, or said she couldn't remember. There was also taxes to be paid, exit visas, exit. The Nazis were. It was all about the money. So we knew that they got documents. We knew that she did immigrate. She immigrated by boat from a port in the Netherlands. That's true. We got the name of the boat. We have the manifest, where they say we, my wife and I. We have the manifest with her name on there. On the manifest, it says Jewish or Hebrew. So, yeah. So once again, it's
Is that when you found out? No.
no, we found out. I'll tell you how we found out. I'll try to answer one question at a time, but I'm happy to talk about it because to me, it's, I've been
Okay, wait, I
living.
want to just tell everyone who is May of 39 is before the Nazis broke the non-aggression pact with the Russians and invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. So she was lucky
That's right,
she
right.
got out then.
She just got
Yeah.
out under the wire. So anyhow, she finally somehow she got the documentation. But I asked her, I said, so mother, that's what I always called her, mother. Mother, how did you get from Vienna at that time to Visseling, which was the port in the Netherlands, to catch the boat, the ship to New York? Simple question. Well, I don't really remember. I must have taken a train. Now, I'd already done a bunch of research on this because I had to nibble around the edges to get information from her, and which I did, and we did get some. At that time, the Jews were not getting on trains and going anywhere except to Dachau. That's where they were going. So I knew that that wasn't true, but I also, on this point, I made a decision in terms of how hard I was going to press my mother on this stuff. And this is just my nature. I mean, I'm curious, okay, and I know that, and I ask questions, and I know that. But I also respect my mother's right to not open this door because this is what she told me. She goes, when I came, I don't remember. When I came to the United States, I put all that behind me and I closed the door and I started a new life. And she had met my father earlier, and that's another story. But that's how she approached it. So in the book, from how she got out in the book from Vienna to the port in the Netherlands is fiction, but it's based on real events that took place and people who did escape through other means from Vienna or Austria through Holland or the Netherlands to the United States. So that's the marriage of the fiction and nonfiction. But that's how she got here.
You remind me,
Okay.
um, in the book, how did you have her go from Vienna to the Netherlands?
A very circuitous route. She had and this was a kind of a an odd coincidence. She needed papers. Now, this is part of the story, if you're asking me the story, because I don't really know how she got from there to Holland. So part of the story is she and her mother went to Berlin to talk to a cousin
Okay,
who's
and wait, okay, but this is the
yeah,
fictional story.
this is fiction. All right. But this did happen, but not to her.
Okay.
There was a man working for the Ministry of the Third Reich in Berlin whose last name was Kolbe, Fritz Kolbe. And he was in charge of creating passports for all the Germans who and the Nazis were working at that time. And he worked for von Ribbentrop, so he was in that area. But he really was anti-Nazi. And so in the story, my mother Greta, that's the character's name, and her mother went to see Kolba, who in the story was a cousin of my mother's mother. Here's how I came up with this idea. My mother's maiden name is Kolba.
Oh,
And I was reading something and I saw that this man who was a spy for the Allies with the same last name as my grandmother, I thought, oh God, this couldn't be. This would be just mind-boggling. But of course, and I did the research, but of course he wasn't. But the name was there. So anyhow, they went there and they had a little agreement. I will get you the papers you need that said you were Catholic because you couldn't travel if it said you were. The Jews had a passport with a red J on it. And I have photos of that and all that kind of stuff. But so in the story, he agrees to provide the papers under this condition that my mother, not my mother, the character, would provide a service for the German resistance. and that took her to uh, back to Antwerp, which she did spend time in
Wait,
with.
but you know that your mother spent time in Antwerp.
Yeah, no, but she really did spend time in Antwerp with a friend of their family who is a diamond dealer, a diamond merchant, and she learned all about diamonds, and she will tell you, I know a lot about diamonds. So in the story, that that time that she was there was true. See, so once again, but I did not know that he was part of the German resistance, and I don't know that he was, but that was all part of the story of her going back and forth. And just to answer your question, she went to Antwerp, she went to Switzerland, and through a circuitous route to Venlo, where there was an event, and then into Netherlands from Venlo to the port of Italy. Very circuitous and dangerous.
And and many, I mean, I know of Vienna, Jews from Vienna who had to do some of these things. So I understand totally what you're talking about.
Mhm.
Uh, but what I want you to take us back to the moment you realized you were Jewish. What was the document? What was the
Well, the document, okay, that's a great question. The documents, we we got a sheath of documents. And I'm holding my fingers up, and it's like 4 inches thick, 3 inches thick of documents from the Austrian government and from Yad Vashem.
Yad Vashem?
Yeah, German documents that were made by the Nazis. And
Wait. But
oh,
how
wait,
did
wait,
you?
wait, 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 let me answer
I
your
want to
question.
know how you knew to go to Yad Vashem. Okay, go ahead.
Let me answer your question. And on the documents, there are all kinds of references to my grandfather and my grandmother. And in their names, their real names were Otto and Amalia Blau. But that's not what was on the documents. Otto Israel Blau, Amalia Sarah Blau. And it was at that point, because we knew that Jews were required to put this in their identification and any documents from the German, what was now the German government. So that was like, okay, but that was just the beginning. And then, the documents from the boat and all the letters, all the correspondence between when the Austrian Nazis were taking over his business, Otto Juden Blau. So it was pretty obvious at that point.
I still want to go back farther. You
Okay.
decided you didn't know you were Jewish. You wanted to know how your mother, whatever happened. So you went to the Austrians first?
We went to the Austrian government first because we had read that there was, and it might have, I have to go back. My wife kind of remembers some of these things a little bit better than I do, the dates and times.
No, but okay.
But before we we got reparations from the Austrian government for my mother. But that was in 2000. It started in 2001 and 2003, and then it took another 6 years to get the actual. But before that, we had traveled. Eileen, my wife and my wife's name is Eileen. We traveled to Vienna, and this was another eye-opening moment, and I can explain how that happened. But that's when we learned that there were documents, because when we went to Vienna in 1998, that was the first time we were there. We visited the resistance. They have a museum there, and part of the things that we learned at that center, that there were documents that you could write the government for, and that's how we got them. But here's more irony here, or not irony, but just my mother's nature. And maybe it's the nature, and I have to get back to a point that you had brought up earlier, but I don't want to lose that, is that when we told my mom, hey, mom, and my mother loves Vienna, or loved Vienna. I mean, she just raved about it, and the music and the art and the people and the food and the coffee. Oh, she was Viennese all the way, more than I realized. Well, I said, well, Mom, we want to go see where your apartment, where you used to live, where you used to have the apartment. Because in my mind, being told at age 10 or 11 that the place was bombed, well, I didn't think it was going to be there anymore. Now, when you're a kid and your mother tells you something, I don't know about you, but I believed it. So my wife and I go to Vienna. Oh, and then she says, oh, you don't want to go there. It's too far. It's too far. Far from where? Well, you just don't want to go there. It's just there's nothing there. Okay, so my father, much to my mother's chagrin, lets the cat out of the bag because I asked her what the address was. Oh, I don't remember. Now, I don't know about you, but I remember where I lived when I was, I remember the address. I still remember my address. She said, I don't remember. My father, Wolfgang Freddie, spills the beans, gives us the address. We go there and we're looking, and we're looking at this building, a pre-war building. On the outside of the building, it's the original building. And there's the name of the architect is on the building, engraved or a plaque on the building. And I'm thinking, wait a second, this building isn't supposed to be here because I thought it was all bombed out. So once again, the penny drops. And it was at that moment, it was at that very moment that this seed was planted. Like, what really happened? What didn't my mother tell me? And I want to just go back to a point that you brought up in the very beginning about the Austrians and the Austrian Jews, how on March 12th, everything changed. And this is an observation of mine in that the documents I read and other sources that people knew what was happening in Germany. I mean, the Jews in Austria knew what was happening in Germany. That was pretty clear. Many of the Jews in Austria said, well, and I think my mother's parents included, oh, that's not going to happen here. Hitler, he's going to go away. He's not going to last. On March 12th, when all that changed, and it was obvious that he was not going away, a lot of the Austrian Jews were saying, he's going to get, and this is what, her father, I believe her father felt, and the mother and the grandmother. Well, he's going to get bored with us Austrians. We don't have to worry. We're not the kind of Jews that he's really after. He's after the more traditional, the more
Orthodox.
Orthodox Jews, maybe the Jews from Eastern Europe or wherever, not us. We're okay. We're paying our taxes. We have a nice business. We don't bother anybody, that kind of thing.
Wait, I have a quick question.
Now, my mother, just one more point. My mother was a little different with that. She was saying, no, don't you see what's happening? What makes you think that it's not going to happen to us? And I will tell you, I'll let you ask another question, but I will tell you another story of why they thought they were safe. But ask your question
I just
first.
wanted to know whether your grandfather had fought in the World War I on the German side.
Uh, I don't believe that he did. Um, that I really don't know.
I was just
I, I
curious
couldn't, I couldn't
because that
tell
was
you.
one reason that they thought, if they got he had an iron cross. But what I don't understand,
Yeah, I'm just trying to think now, and there was something about that, but I don't know for sure.
okay, so what I don't understand is since your mother never told you she was Jewish, why she was concerned about Hitler. Was she concerned about Hitler, though, just across the board, that he would take away civil liberties?
I think, I can't answer that entirely because what the way she always described her her views was oftentimes in relation to helping people. who were either being I, treated poorly or unfairly in that regard. Um, she was a political and she said, "I am a socialist." Now, I don't know, she was, but at that time, that was the party she was.
Great. I found
She
it.
thought, yeah. So she was very anti-fascist. So see, it wasn't that it was Hitler, it was the fascists. So those she was vehemently against. And that goes to another little part of the story that I want to share with you and the picture on the cover. She's ice skating with a fellow who's one of her, and we don't really know exactly who he is. Okay, but I know that he is one of what she described as her three musketeers. And she had three boyfriends that she palled around with. And the reason that she palled around with three of them is so that no single one could get too close. That was my mother. She was that was her nature. And this is a story that she told. She said, after the Anschluss, shortly after the Anschluss, one of her three musketeers, she saw one of her three musketeers across the street in a brown shirt Nazi uniform. And the week or two before that, she had had a big conversation, fight, discussion, argument with her about the socialists and the fascists. And in that argument, she was very socialist and anti-Nazi or anti-fascist, and he was very anti-socialist and pro-fascist. And this is true from what she told me. Now, did this really happen? Did she make this up? I don't think so. She said she saw this guy, one of her boyfriends, her three boyfriends, across the street on a street in Vienna, and in a Nazi uniform, who knew what her views were. That was as good as being deported or at least arrested. And so I took that story and turned that story into that character becomes her arch enemy in the book from beginning to end. And he's a pretty nasty guy. And
He doesn't give up. It reminds me of
he doesn't give up. No.
Les Miserables.
Yeah, and there are other two friends are part of the story too. But he's the villain in the story.
So I think probably that she understood it more from an anti-fascist point of
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. She may have known, she knew of Hitler, I'm sure. But I think the biggest problem there were two things that went on in Austria at that time, before and after the Anschluss, is this denial. There's no other word for it. It's denial. And it just went on for probably to the point to where, people were getting put on trains and the other thing is, and again, I learned this, and maybe I knew some of this. I mean, I don't really remember how much I knew and how much I didn't, but there were a lot of Austrians who were right there supporting the fascists. They the Jews, okay, they're here, they have nice businesses, we can, count on them for doctors and some accountants and some of the other things that we take, for granted. But boy, once the Nazis came in, all those people became anti-Jews, anti-Jewish, and friends that were, Christians. Not all Christians. And this is another thing that I learned. There were many Christians that helped Jews, Catholics and priests. And there are many examples, some of which I use, again, in the book. I think what's more important than having that everything is historically, tied down with a footnote, because I'm not a historian, but people, and this was one of my goals in writing the book, is that people don't really know that much of what really happened on a personal level. And that's kind of what I was driving at. And as far as the character, the main character is concerned, I didn't want to turn her into a hero or a superwoman or anything like that. But my goal in the character was to express a mentality. And my mother's mentality was pretty strong. My father once commented to a friend of mine who had just met him. He said, "You haven't met anybody until you met Don's mother." I mean, that was his comment about his wife. And she was a force to be reckoned with. And so that character is really what I wanted to um, put into the character in the book. And that was really part of my goal.
Well, I think you did a good job.
I don't know if she would like the book because, it's funny. She was very outspoken in many ways, but in other ways, she wasn't. But that was her. And I respected that she didn't want to tell me about certain things. And I could have pressed her, but my decision was I did not want her waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning thinking about all this stuff. And I certainly didn't tell her what happened to her parents. I mean, I would have never done that.
Oh, she was alive when you found this out?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you didn't tell her?
No. Why? What good would it have done? All it would have done would have been, in my view, would open a door to probably the most traumatic part of her life and guilt and all the other stuff that people have. I got out, she didn't, they
Right.
didn't. If I had stayed, all that stuff. For what purpose? I knew what happened. We found out what happened. So um,
And she had never expressed an interest that you knew of in finding out what happened to her parents.
the only time that I found out that she expressed an interest in what happened to her family, which I didn't even know existed, believe it or not. I had cousins. I didn't know anything about these people. No, I mean, really. My wife was saying, you know, you had a family, but they were erased. So in that way, the Nazis succeeded. But in the 60s, I was born in 1948. So in the 60s, I was, a junior high school. And yeah, okay. And I found some letters that they had written to an attorney, they being my mother and father, had written to an attorney in Austria trying to find out some information about property
Mm.
because they were wealthy. I mean, they had money, and which is, I think, the secret to how they survive, among other things. But that was the only thing. And the Austrian government, they were just forget it. When we went to Austria, we bought a guidebook. Visit Austria and the history of Austria, the Ottoman Empire, and all this stuff. World War II, 2 lines.
I know.
That's it. Is that the Austrians, like World War II? I mean, until the 2000, that's the earliest, 2001. The Austrian government did not acknowledge that they were complicit in what was going on. And there were plenty
No,
of Austrians were,
yeah,
and
they were taken over by the Germans. They
it was
did
all
not
their
that they were didn't bother to mention that they were enthusiastic.
well, they were benefiting financially.
Yes,
They I mean, I don't know. We went to my mother's apartment. We got into the building of that apartment uninvited, but I got in and I took pictures of the stairway and I mean, it was nice on a mezzanine floor. I mean, we didn't get into the apartment. We got into the building, I should say. But I want to just go back one step. Can I just, because
yes,
you
and
said,
then
how
we
did,
have to
yeah,
finish. Okay.
okay. Um, how did they survive? And my grandfather, her father, and my mother in 1935 went and visited the Pope in Italy. Yeah. My grandfather and his daughter, my mother, went to visit the Pope, and my mother tells the story. She kissed the Pope's ring. Okay, whoopee. All right. And my grandfather got a letter, a document from the Vatican that said that he, donated a certain amount of money or something to the Vatican, to the Pope, or whoever it is, and it was an official document. And this is what my mother told me, that they put that document in the window of their store.
That's very interesting.
That's pretty wild. And he was saying, hey, look, we're covered. I got friends in the government who are, business
Okay,
friends.
but wait, one more question. But since the Anschluss was March of 38 and Kristallnacht was in November 38, quickly, because we are running out of time, what
Okay.
happened? Do you
Okay.
know?
I asked my mother that very question. And she said, it wasn't that much different. That's what she said. I didn't change that much. I said, how did things change? Here's what we found out. There was a synagogue 50 yards from their apartment building. You could see it. If you look down the street, you could see the corner. It's a police station now. That synagogue was burned to the ground.
But what about your grandfather's store?
The grandfather's store is still there. It was taken over by that store is still there. But my point is that how could you not remember a synagogue or any building burning down right down the street as a result of a horde of blacks, brown shirts and SS troops? The store was taken over by Picorni, and it's still there. We went to the store when we were in Vienna. It's still still a
Well, okay,
similar type of store.
this is important though. Had he
Okay, yes,
taken
ma'am.
over the store before November 38? I want to know whether the letter helped.
My mother didn't seem to think that it would. And in my extrapolation of that, his wife, my mother's mother, didn't think that it would, or the grandmother. The grandmother always said, this too shall pass. That was her attitude. So did it help? It couldn't hurt, but in the end, nothing helped.
No, I just wanted to know whether you knew whether
I'd love to have that letter, but I don't.
I meant whether you knew whether the business had been sold to the employee before November 38th.
Oh no, it was sold after that.
Okay,
I
that's
have
what I was just curious.
in fact, it was sold. Well, no, it was sold in before they were deported. They were deported in 41. It was sold not long after my mother left. Mother left in 39, May of 39, and sometime probably in 1940. This was my grandfather's theory. He'll sell it to the employee, and then the government came in and said, no, we're not going to accept your price. You're going to have to sell it for this much. My grandfather asked for this much. And of course, the guy who was buying it said, sure, why not? And his deal with the owner was that he would buy it back after the Nazis got bored and left. Now, did that really happen? No. But that, I had to kind of imagine what my grandfather would do to survive. And that was part of it. But they unfortunately didn't. And neither did the grandmother and other relatives. So this is the sad part of it. But the good part of it is here I am.
And now you know you're Jewish, so that's even.
And now I know I'm Jewish. And here's the funny thing. I have some friends that go, well, we always thought you were Jewish, but I said, well, I guess I am. But I'm really I grew up, like I said, in a very non-religious household, and it was that way even up to the point till my parents passed away. My father in 2008, my mother in 2017. They both lived long and happy lives. And the fact that they didn't tell me some things, well, I'm sure that's not unusual when it comes from parents and their children. Why they didn't tell me this, that they were raised in a Jewish home, I simply don't know.
Anyway, this has been a fascinating conversation,
Well, I've had
but
fun.
we do have to end on a somber note, which is that may the memories of the victims and all the people who tried to save them be a blessing forever.